Hi, I'm Fabrice Ferrari. Welcome to the WinDevCon 2007 Printing Without Reports course. We have 1 hour to talk about the real power behind iPrint. The first thing we're going to see is the pros and cons. First, you have to know, I'm sure that you already know, that there are two ways to print in WinDev, WebDev and WinDev Mobile. They are all working the same way. You have first the report editor, and then you have the direct printing order in W language, where you can do exactly what you want, print words, lines, and all this kind of thing on paper directly. So why would you want to spend your time designing a report by hand when you have the report editor? That's the first part. First, we have to say that the report facility is good and it's becoming better all the time. If you have had a look at the WinDev 12 announcement, the report editor is even going to be much better in this version. So there's not really any incentive basically to use the iPrint. But at some point you're going to run into cases that are either impossible or very difficult to do in the report editor. By example, margin management. You created a report and it's just working perfectly well everywhere, except that you have a new customer and this customer has this printer that you've never used before, and this printer has physical margin that are bigger than the one you're used to, and your report doesn't work. So what can you do? Well, basically you have to modify your report for everybody, and perhaps not everybody will be happy. Then you have the cases where you have this complex report that are required, where you have 2 pages in portrait, then 1 page in landscape, then the total is in portrait on another paper tray because the total has to be on a blue paper or whatever. That's not something that you can do easily in a report. Of course, you have the infamous requirement, I want to know on each page the number of page of the whole report. So page 1 on 17, 2 on 17, and so on till 17 on 17. Try to do that in a report facility, it's going to be very funny. Then you have the case of the form, the pre-printed form, basically an administration form, where you have to print information in the right spot. And to do that, of course, you have to do printing on absolute coordinates. Well, the problem is that in the report you define the coordinates based on the physical margin of your printer. And when you change printer, when your user is not using the same printer or even the same version of the printer driver, then suddenly the physical margin can be different and will be different. And because of that, well, you're not going to print at the right spot on your form. And then you have, of course, this customer who wants that particular report in portrait, but this one wants it in landscape, that other one on a different size of paper. So how many versions of the same report are you going to build in the report editor to do all that? Well, with the iPrinting way of working that I'm going to show you, only one. And then, of course, I want to give a report editor to my customer, but report and query is way too complex. Doesn't work with WebDev. They cannot design their report online, and well, it's 100 megabytes to add to my application, who is only 5 megabytes. I don't want to do that. I need something that is much smaller than that, much simpler, and well, you can do that with the iPrint. Of course, printing with iPrint is a little more complex. That's for sure. You have to design it yourself. But once your basic functionalities are written, it's not that complex anymore. And the very good thing about this particular course is that I'm going to give you a lot of the basic functionality that you're going to need in a class that I have already written years ago and I've been using ever since. You're going to really be able to jumpstart this functionality without having to code that much. In the report editor, you have these wonderful functionalities: export to Excel, export to Word, PDF, send to email, and all that. And you don't have that when you do an iPrint report. Well, it's true and it's not true, because there's a trick. If you create an empty report with the report editor, and in that empty report you call your printing code that is done with iPrint and all these wonderful things, well, suddenly all these export functionality are available. And even better, in version 12 they realized that it was possible, so the functionality will be available directly for an iPrint report. So that's about all. That's about all the big pros and cons. Let's see now how to do it, how to use the W language iPrint and its related function to print a report with as much power as you need. Here is the WD printing project, and in it the Win printing window. And for once we're going to really start by the end. I'm going to show you what you can do with this system. I'm just going to do this and get the default, and here we are. Let's have a closer look. Sorry, smaller. Here we are. We have this program printing a report without using the report editor. The report is organized in 4 columns per page with a rounded border around each column, and the text is snaking around. It's going this way, then here, second column, third column, fourth column, then the second page, and so on. And this text is printed on 8 pages. The text that is printed, by the way, is just a copy and paste of the help of the automatic application feature of WinDev. It's there. It's the text that is in this field, if you wonder. Now, if I say that I want not 4 but 6 columns, and I want it on another printer, which will have different margin, of course, let's say this one, and I want it in landscape. Sorry, French Windows, it's paysage, here it's landscape. And click OK. I now have the same report. It's not another one, it's the same one with 6 columns. And as you can see, it's printing in landscape on this paper. I can do the same thing, saying okay, I want only 1 column. This time I don't want a border, and I'm going to do that on a much smaller paper, A6, in portrait. I now have 33 pages, and my text is flowing from one page to the next. all that with only one code and no report, as in report editor. One of the first problems we are talking about in our list of pros and cons is that there is no mechanism in the report editor to print in absolute coordinate. Now I'm going to show you what you can do using iPrint. First, let's print in relative coordinate. Let's see how it works. If I print on the PDF writer printer, here I'm trying to print in coordinate 0, 0. Okay, that's the code in the button. So on the PDF writer, here is the text printed in 0, 0. As you can see, the text is exactly on the margin, and obviously it's doing what I'm asking. And the reason for that is that, well, it's a PDF printer. There is no physical margin, so it's very easy. Now, if I try to do the same thing on another printer that I have declared here, this Canon printer, I do the exact same code, it's the same button, but suddenly you can see that here I have this margin here. And the reason for that is that the printer, which is a real printer, not a PDF printer, has a physical margin of about 3.5 millimeter, which is this place here. And this is the margin that is called the technical margin, the place on the paper where the printer cannot physically print. If you look at this Get Margin button and ask for the Canon what are the margin, you are getting this wonderful trace window in which it's telling you margin 3.43, 3.35, 3.01 and 5.00, which is left, right, top, bottom margin. If you ask for the same thing for the PDF writer, you get this value 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 5. And we could do that for each and every printer that is declared here, and there's only a third one, and we would get again another value 3.39, 3.39, 2.9 and 5.04. So each printer has different margin, and that's why when you print in 0, 0 on different printer, it's going to print in physically different places on the paper. Now let's try to print in absolute coordinate. Let's start with the Qt PDF writer, because we know that this one has nearly no physical margin at all, so it will be a good comparison point. And I'm trying in that button to print in 10, 10 absolute, 10 millimeter from the top and 10 millimeter from the left. Here is the result. As you can see, I have my space here, and we want to be able to compare to something else, so we're going to take some eye lining. It's about at the right of the minus button, and it's nearly at the middle of the first page here on the left. Okay, let's do the same thing on the Canon. We know that there's a 3.5 millimeter difference in the margin, but here we are exactly at the same position and at the same position, which means that the code in this button is able to do what the report editor is not able to do: print exactly at a specific spot on a form. If you want to fill an administrative form, you can now do it. And let's see how it's done. If I go in the relative button, you'll see that the code is extremely simple. The eye configure is there to let me choose the printer. The eye preview I100 is there to tell the system to print in the preview window at 100%, allowing me not to print on paper, which would be very hard for you to see. Then I'm setting the margin at 0000, which tells the system to put the margin at the maximum value available. The value for this instruction being from always the corresponding side of the paper, so 0 from the left, 0 from the top, 0 from the right, 0 from the bottom. Then once the margin has been set, I'm setting the X and Y coordinate to 0 compared to the margin, and I'm printing text in 00, asking that this text to be committed to the printer and stopping the printing. And this is the normal iPrint system to print a text anywhere on a paper. But of course, as you saw when I used that system, it works the exact same way than the report editor. It's in relative coordinate, and this are relative to the actual physical margin of the printer. So how was I able to print in absolute coordinate? Well, I wrote a class to do that. And if you're afraid of not being able to use a class because you're not doing any object-oriented programming, well, I'm sure that after you will have followed the object-oriented programming course, you will not have any problem. Until then, I hope that you will bear with me and consider that calling a method of a class is exactly the same thing than calling a procedure. You could have all that code in procedure if you want. It's just giving you more possibilities in a class, that's all. So, what do we have in the absolute button? Again, I configure to choose the printer. I preview to go in the preview window. Margin 0000, so I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm setting the system to the maximum possible margin for the printer. So this has no difference. Then I'm declaring a CLPrint object, that's my printing class, and I'm calling a method called printAbsolute in 1010 and with the text that I want to print, doing the iPrint and IN printing. So the only difference basically here is that I'm calling a method that is doing the job for me. If you don't want to know how it's working, fine, just use it, and you will never need to put your hands in it. Now, if you're curious to see how it's done, we can go in there. This is the printAbsolute. Again, you see you have all these commands, so you will be able to really use it without problem. And how is it done? The first thing, if you want to manage a problem that is the physical margin of a printer, is that you have to get to know the physical margin. And for that, I had to write a method called getMargins, because there is no direct W language syntax that returns the physical margin of the printer. At some point we'll look in the detail of the get margin and you will see exactly how it works. I'm sure you'll love it. But for now, let's just say that the get margin is able to return in these 4 parameters the exact value in millimeters of the physical margin. After that, there is this set of comparisons here where I check that the position at which I want to print is not inside the physical margin. If I want to print in 1.1 and the physical margin is in 3.5, that's not going to work. And not only is it not going to work, but it can create a random error. I've seen in some occasion, depending on the printer driver, that this can cause anything from blank pages coming out, and I'm talking about 50 blank pages for each page, to crashing the system, and in the middle with changing the font size to 50 or removing some part of the... It's totally random. You don't know what the printer driver is going to do if you try to print inside the physical margin. So if I try to print inside a physical margin, I just return false and don't do anything. That's the security testing. And then here is the real code to print in absolute coordinate. And it's only setting the position to the position that you want to print to minus the left margin and minus the top margin in just a subtraction. So there is really nothing to it. It's extremely easy to use, and well, it solves the problem of printing on an existing form. Now let's have a look at this margin calculation stuff. This I have to tell you because otherwise you're going to go in the code and scratch your head, is based from a very simple fact that is generally overlooked by everybody who's looking at the help file. This method works for all margin because the I margin order works with parameters that are always from the side the parameter relates to, which means that when you say I want to set up a left margin of 10 millimeters, it's 10 millimeters starting from there. Now if you say I want to set up a right margin of 10 millimeters, it's 10 millimeters starting from there, not the left. So each time, same thing for the top. If you want top margin, it's going to start from the top. If you want a bottom margin, it's the really the bottom size of the paper who is going to be your relative coordinate. So because it works that way, we have a way to calculate the physical margin on each side. All the coordinates in the iPrint function are relative to the margin, except of course the iMargin function, where it's relative to the size of the paper. So if we set first all margin to 0, we can get the page width and the page height. It will be the space between the left margin and the right margin for the width, and same thing of course for the height. Then we set one of the margin at a value that is, and we are sure about that, bigger than the physical margin. So for the left margin, as you can see, I just set up, it's the left margin, I just set up a margin of 100 millimeters. Of course, there's no printer out there with a margin bigger than 100 millimeters. It's about 4 inches, so hopefully there's nothing out there that is so bad. And the help tells you that if the margin is smaller than the physical left margin, the physical left margin will apply, of course, because it's not possible to set it up more on the left than the physical margin. So if we look at that schema here, I'm setting up a left margin here and at 100 millimeters here, and that's the physical left margin. If I try to set it up here, it's set up here. If I try to set it up here, it's 100 millimeter exactly from the left side of the paper. So now that I did that, I can calculate my left margin. It's that distance that I know, it's 100 millimeters, minus the page width, which is that, that's the maximum page width, minus the current page width, which is obviously that. And that's it. By just doing that, we know that one. And we know that when we set up this 100 millimeters margin here, this is from here. So we just got that distance as the difference, and we can calculate the left margin. And we can do exactly the same thing for the right margin, the top margin, and the bottom margin. I know, I already lost some of you. But you don't have to worry about it, because the good thing is it's already done, it's already coded, and it's working. So you can just use the get margin method, and you will get the physical margin on your paper, and it doesn't matter which printer, which driver, you will always get the real physical margin, and you will be able to build on that. So that's the margin. Now let's see something else. We are going here to see how to print a string. And when I say a string, I mean a memo string, because that's the next problem that you will find out. Printing just a word like I did in the relative and absolute tests was extremely easy. Just print that and you're done. But when you have a string that is extremely long, like this one by example, you have to print that, and of course you have only so much space on your page. So how are you going to print? Well, let's have a look first on how it works, and then we'll see how it's done. So this code is going to print the content of this wonderful edit field in a limited place. Let's have a look. As you can see, it's printed here in a square, an area that I define in my code. And I'm just printing the beginning up to the point where I cannot print anymore. So that's basically what you want to do when you are printing the description of a product on an invoice or anything like that. And then perhaps you have other needs, like print centered. It's exactly the same thing, but this time the whole thing is centered in my square. Or you can print right aligned. Okay, just by changing this radio button, I just change the way it's printed. So let's have a look at the code in that print button. That way you'll see how simple it is to do that. Here it is. That's all. As you can see, everybody can use that system. I ask the preview to go on screen, I create my printing object, and then here I'm just managing the radio button to have the correct parameter to send to my method, and my method is here. In one line I'm printing a memo. The memo is this string, and I'm printing it on a maximum height of 100 millimeter. It's about 4 inches for those of you who are still not happy with the metric system. And it's between this left margin and that width. That's it. Then the mode, of course, is L, it's printed left, C is centered, and R is printed right. And that's all you need to know to use that code. Of course, we're going to have a look at how it's coded, because you're going to tell me it's extremely complex. I'm not going to be able to modify it if I need to. Well, not so much. It needs some understanding when you first write it, but After that, it's not that bad. Let's have a look. So that's all the header with all the explanation. We don't care really about that. The code is here and here. Okay, it's about 3 screens of code. How does it work? First, let's have a look at what it does exactly. The text is printed starting on a left side, so you have a left margin that you define for your printing area. It's printed on a specific length, so you say, okay, I'm printing from 100 millimeter on 50 millimeters width, by example. Then words are not cut when you have to go to the next line, except if there is no separator in the text. And separator is defined loosely as carriage return, space, dot, comma, parenthesis, and so on. You have a list of separator that you can of course change in order for your text to wrap in a different way. The text is printed at the current vertical position, which means that when you are printing a document like an invoice, by example, you are on a current line and you want to print a memo. Well, you just print it, say, okay, it's from that column on that width, maximum height is that, and that's it. The text is printed in the current font, so you can change the font before you call the memo and it will be printed in that font. And of course the text is printed on the maximum height that you send here. The calling code is in charge of verifying that there is enough room to print that area in the remaining of the page. The result is 0 if everything went well, the whole text was printed, or it's the character number of the last printed character in the string if everything couldn't be printed. In fact, you get, okay, I was able to print 223 characters. If you want to print the remaining, just do what you have to do. And we'll see later how to do that, of course. So perhaps some of you who already used iPrint function are going to say, well, wait a second, I know that there's a function that does exactly that. It's called iPrint block. Well, yes, there is, except that first, when I written that code, it didn't exist, and second, here you have full control again about what you are doing, which means that if you want to implement things in there that well, are not implemented in the block printing order, you can. By example, well, you could say, okay, I'm going to do all the calculation but not the printing. The printing is going to be optional. And if the printing is optional, what do I get? I get to know exactly how many pages I need before I print for real. And I can print my 1 on 17, 2 on 17, 3 on 17, and so on page numbers. No, that code is not included in the class. You will have to code that yourself. It's really depending of what you want to do, but you have the opportunity to expand that code to whatever you want. We are not going to go line by line through the code. It will be, well, probably boring, and we have other things to do. What we're going to do is go through the logic of the code. This way you'll understand how it works and you'll be able to modify it, enhance it, use it for your own purpose exactly the way you want. Let's have a look at the code. So the first part, of course, is initialization and creation of all the variables. Basically, the code is a loop on the memo lines. memo lines as defined by carriage return, what would normally go to the next line in a memo string. So we are first extracting that in order to manage this carriage return the correct way. And then we are looking if the width of the line that we extracted between two carriage return fit in the space, in the width that was sent as a parameter. If it's small enough, we are just going to print it, but if it's too big, then we're going to remove one character after the other. In fact, we're going to go through the character and add them to a working string till we reach a width that is too big. And once we have that, we remove one character and we're able to print. Of course, at that point, we have to check if and where is the separator to use in order to print without cutting a word. So that's the first part, is this loop on adding a character that you can see here. Check if it's too big. If it's too big, remove the last character, and then again do this loop to find the last separator of the string we just extracted. Once we have that, we can print it. So, of course, at that point we also have to check, do we have enough room vertically to print, because we received a maximum height for the text to be printed in. So that's what we are doing. Print if we have enough room. If we don't have enough room, we return the number of characters already printed, and the calling code is going to do the rest. And now we're going really to print, and that's where the left-centered or right printing happens. Well, how do you do that? Well, the left is the regular iPrint string, so that's absolutely normal code. The centered is print centered method coming with the class, so you don't have anything to do with that, just what string do you want to print, and between what left and right margin, and we just calculate the right margin by adding the width to the left margin, nothing in there. And for the right printing, it's even simpler. We just send the string and then say in which position on the right, basically we are sending the right margin to print against. So that's it. And of course we are increasing the count of printed character and going to the next line in the loop. So that's about the main thing here. Everything else is printing when, well, it's smaller than the line, so there's nothing really to do, just print. And if the case where the whole string fits on the line, where we're going to do the exact same thing. So it's a code that is pretty straightforward. There's really nothing to it, and as you can see, it's heavily commented, so even if you want to make modification or check the code, you won't have any problem. Everything is clear enough. So that's it. That's the whole code that is necessary to print a memo string. And the good thing is, I had to code it a long time ago. You don't. It's already available for you here. Let's see what comes next. Let's close that code, that one, and that one. We don't need that for now. So we already saw what we have in there. We saw what we have in there. Now we're going to see the good stuff. The first button is an extremely simple code to print a text. Let's have a look at what it does. So again, it's working on that text in the edit control, and if it's just printing the text using the paper, and that's it, nothing else. So what is the difference between that and the code that we saw before? But the code that we saw before, we are printing in a small portion of the paper and discarding the rest of the text, which is something that can be good enough, by example, for the small description of a product in an invoice. Now, if you cannot accept this kind of thing, you have to be able to print everything. So that's a very basic example to make it very simple and very clear to understand on how to do that. Here we're just using the full paper size and printing on it. Let's have a look at the corresponding code. So clearly you already know that we're going to use this print memo function again, but what are we doing to manage this whole page thing? Here you are. I did all that in 4 lines. First, the preview, again, creating this time a print text object. Yes, it's another class, and we'll talk about the fact that it's in another class in the object programming course. For now, let's just say that it's another class that is calling the function of the first one, because you'll see all that later. Just bear with me on that and look at that. There is a function called print text, to which I give the text to print, and it does all the thing I did. So this obviously is something extremely complex. Let's have a look. Here's the whole function. If you find that that is a complex code to print an as big as you want string on as many paper page is necessary, no matter what the size of the paper is, well, I will have to disagree with you. Let's have a look at what we do. The only parameter is the text to print. So in this printing, we decided that we would use the whole paper. So we are setting the margin to the maximum possible. So the whole physical available size of the paper is going to be used. Then we are saying that we want to use a font of Swiss type, normal, 10 size. Okay, and use it. And then we are putting the going to work with the length of the text in characters. So we are putting in this variable the length of the text, and we're doing a loop. That's about all there is to understand. While the number of characters to print is bigger than 0, then we continue. Okay, that's the principle of the thing. We are each time setting ourselves at the top of the page, first line of the page to print. We are asking here to print this whole text, and we are asking to print on the whole height of the page minus 2 millimeters to have some breathing room compared to the physical margin. At 1 millimeter from the left margin, and on the page width minus 2 millimeters again for breathing room. That's it. If the result of that is bigger than 0, it means that not everything was printed. So I have in that the number of characters that were printed. I just go to the next page, skip page, and then I put in my work variable here the remaining part of the string to print. And I go to the next iteration in the loop, and that's it. That's all there is to it, to print an illimited string on an illimited number of pages. So of course, if you are working in an invoice, it's going to be a little more complex, because you will have to print not only that text but also the colon and all that. But all that is really very manageable. It's not a problem. Yeah. Let's close this and have a look now at this wonderful stuff that we started with. Let's have a second look at what it does first. Okay, here print on 4 with borders. Okay, change 3 columns with borders. Working fine. As you can see, the number of page went from 8 to 9 because there's just this more because of the 3 columns. And let's say, oh sorry, I just put a maximum of 9 column with border in landscape. Yes, paysage is French for landscape. Sorry, it's a French machine. And on another printer and on legal paper. And here we are. Okay, so that's what I call adaptive printing. With this kind of system, your report, your one and only report, is going to be printable on anything basically that the customer throw at you. Well, of course, if you print an invoice and the user want to print it in a postcard format, it's not going to be very pretty, but everything is doable, in fact. Now let's see how complex that code is. Because now, of course, I'm sure you are thinking, okay, this guy is crazy and the code is going to be awful. Well, let's see. Here it is. If you can count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 line of code that print text on X column method once and for all. And now I can use it. And that's all there is to it. The number of column, is there a border or not, and that's it. So let's have a look at this print text on X column code. As you can see, again, it's a very short code. There's nothing to it at all. All the initialization here is straightforward. The only thing that is a little tricky in that code is that because the number of column is changeable by the user, I have to calculate where each column is going to be and the width of each column, obviously. So here, that's what I'm doing. The column width is the width of the page minus 5 millimeters multiplied by the number of column plus 1. If you wonder why plus 1, it's the infamous problem of the number of separator and the number of thing between the separator, and then divided by the number of column. So that's basically taking care of a 5 millimeter margin between each column, and outside each column too, 5 millimeter on the left and the right, and that's it. Now I know that my column is going to be of that width. What am I doing after that? Setting the maximum margin that I want to do. I could absolutely set up a margin in only half the size of the page and printing that. It's perfectly doable also. again the font, and then work the exact same way than previously with the number of character and the print memo function. Nothing new here. The only difference is that I'm calculating each time where I'm printing. So that's just this few calculations that are really not that about from where is the beginning of the column and where to print. And then I added in that example, and of course I could have done that in any of the previous example, the printing of the border, and in that case it's a round border, it could be a square one, outside of the text. And what I'm doing, I'm just using the same calculation that is here and removing or adding 1 millimeter on each side in order for the border to be outside of the text and not on top of it. Then I'm managing the column. You can see there's the first part where the column number is used. So again, if there is something to print again, we need either a new column or a new page. So if the column number is the maximum column number of the page, we skip a page. If not, we just do the regular column number increase and do it again. And that's the end of it. You have a multi-column code example there. It's extremely easy. Again, based on that print memo code. So that's a really small example, but at the same time very powerful. You have something where you can change the user can change the number of columns. It can add the border or not. It can use that on any printer, on any size of paper, and the printing is working. I really wanted to show you this kind of tool because it gives you really much more control and power for the whole report thing. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't use a report. If what you want to do is a pretty straightforward report where you don't need to use the whole paper, where you can set up 20 millimeters margin everywhere so it will work on every printer, and where you know for sure that you won't have a user asking you to print that on a different size of paper, because yeah, you still have that problem. Well, in that case, just use the report editor. If you need to have something that is extremely customizable, where you want to build your own report editor, which is basically letting the user choose which column of the file you want to print, that's about it. Then, well, you can use the size of each field, calculate that, print that dynamically, and just use the same the same code to work. That's all. You have seen in the code that I showed you that I used only very basic printing function. X position, Y position, print word, print, and border. And that's about it. You have other printing order available. You will have to discover them yourself because we don't have the time to go through all that, but there are much more to it than just that. This is the basic that you need in order really to start to use that in an easy way. What I gave you here in that class is enough for you to work on nearly everything that you're going to find in regular management. If you need something else, you'll have to code it, or to call me, of course.